In the rolling green hills of early 19th century Tennessee, nestled near the Red River in Robertson County, there stood a modest farmhouse belonging to a man named John Bell. It was the kind of place that seemed safe from the chaos of the world. Surrounded by farmland, the quiet rustle of oak trees, and the hum of cicadas that filled the long southern evenings, John Bell had moved his family there around 1804, seeking a peaceful life far from the growing towns and political unrest of the era. He was a stern but fair man, respected among his neighbors for his work ethic and faith. His wife, Lucy, was gentle, soft-spoken, known in the community for her kindness and devotion to her children. Together, they built a thriving farm, a home filled with the warmth of family and the promise of better days. But what began as a story of prosperity would soon descend into one of America's darkest and most enduring nightmares. A haunting so disturbing it would be spoken of for generations as the Bell Witch. For years, life on the Bell property seemed idyllic. The Bells worked the land, raised their children, and became fixtures of their small but growing community near the town of Adams. Yet by the autumn of 1817, strange things began to stir around the edges of that peaceful life. It started quietly, as most hauntings do. John Bell was out inspecting his cornfields one late afternoon when he saw a strange creature lurking between the stalks. Something with the body of a dog, but the head of a rabbit. Startled, he fired his rifle, but when the smoke cleared, the creature had vanished, leaving no tracks in the soil. John told no one at first, dismissing it as a trick of the light or a product of exhaustion, but within days, his sons began to report hearing scratching at the doors and walls of the house at night. The family's dogs barked furiously at unseen intruders. When John went outside to investigate, the air was still and the land silent, as though even the crickets had been frightened into hiding. At first, the Bells thought animals were to blame, perhaps raccoons or rats nesting in the walls. But soon the sounds became unmistakably deliberate. It wasn't random scratching anymore. It was knocking, steady and measured, as if someone, or something, were rapping on the walls from within. The family lay awake at night, listening to those knocks travel through the house like footsteps along the beams. Then came the whispers, faint, almost like the murmur of wind between the logs, but carrying rhythm, tone, and sometimes words that made the children tremble. Betsy Bell, the youngest daughter, was the first to admit she heard it clearly, a woman's voice, faint but distinct, calling her name from the dark. At first, she thought it was a dream, but the next night the voice came again, closer, whispering her name with cruel familiarity. The Bells were God-fearing people, not prone to superstition, but fear began to settle into the walls of that house like moisture. John led the family in prayer each evening, asking the Lord to drive away the evil that seemed to stalk them. Yet the disturbances only intensified. Furniture creaked and moved on its own. The sound of chewing and gnawing echoed from within the walls, though nothing was ever found. Sheets were ripped from beds in the middle of the night. The children woke screaming, claiming unseen hands had slapped or pinched them. The family's eldest sons began sleeping with rifles by their sides, determined to catch whatever plagued their home. But every time they searched, they found nothing, no tracks, no animals, no intruder. And yet the noise would resume the moment they returned inside. By the end of that first winter, what had been strange and frightening became undeniable. The unseen force was not merely haunting the house, it was aware, intelligent. It mimicked the voices of the family, repeating their words in mocking tones. It laughed when they prayed, sighed when they cried, and sometimes sang hymns softly in the dark. The witch, as it would later be called, seemed to know everything about them, their fears, their secrets, even their private thoughts. Betsy, now a young girl on the edge of adolescence, bore the worst of it. She awoke with her hair twisted around her neck, her cheeks red from invisible slaps, her body trembling with cold. Her mother would rush to her side, finding no cause, no explanation except for the terror in the girl's eyes. Lucy tried to comfort her, whispering that it was only dreams, but the marks on her daughter's skin said otherwise. John Bell began confiding in his closest neighbor, James Johnston, a man of faith and level mind. Johnston agreed to spend a night at the Bell home, determined to expose the truth behind the disturbances. He and his wife prayed as they lay in the guest room, but before long, they heard footsteps pacing the floorboards above them. Then came the scratching, the thumps, the low murmur of a woman's voice. Johnston called out, demanding to know who was there. The response chilled him to the bone, a soft, mocking laugh that seemed to come from the corner of the room. He was struck on the cheek by an unseen hand. The next morning, pale and shaken, he told John Bell that the spirit was beyond human understanding. "There is something not of this earth in your home," he said, and he refused to stay another night. Word began to spread across the countryside. Neighbors whispered about the strange events at the Bell farm, about the voice that spoke in the night, and the girl who bore the witch's bruises. Some refused to believe it. Others came to see for themselves. Each visitor left with a story. Some heard whispers, others saw objects move or felt invisible touches. The spirit seemed to enjoy the attention, growing bolder with each witness. Soon the voice began speaking more clearly, claiming to be the ghost of a woman named Kate Batts, a neighbor of the Bells who, according to rumor, had once quarreled with John over a land deal. She had died years earlier, but the voice that now haunted the Bells claimed vengeance against him, swearing it would torment him until the day he died. Whether this was truly Kate's spirit or something wearing her name, no one could say, but the haunting had found its identity, and its power grew with every passing night. By the time spring arrived in 1818, the Bell Witch had become part of the land itself. Travelers passing by the property reported hearing cries echoing from the fields. Horses balked near the fence line, refusing to go further. Neighbors swore they saw flickering lights dancing among the trees, like lanterns carried by invisible hands. Inside the house, the Bells lived in constant dread, torn between faith and despair. Their prayers offered no relief. The witch laughed at their hymns. And though they could not see her, they felt her everywhere. In the creaking wood, the whispering wind, and the cold breath that brushed their necks as they tried to sleep. What had begun as simple noises had evolved into a haunting that would defy explanation and consume an entire family. The Bell home was no longer a house of peace. It was a vessel for something dark, intelligent, and merciless. Something that had chosen them and would not let go. By the time the first frost of 1818 settled across Robertson County, the Bell family was living in a kind of waking nightmare. What had begun as whispers and scratches now erupted nightly into violent sounds, the slamming of doors, the dragging of chains, the sound of heavy footsteps pacing the floorboards, though no person was there to make them. The children no longer slept through the night. Their faces grew pale, their eyes ringed with exhaustion. The family dogs, once proud protectors of the farm, whimpered and hid under the porch each evening as the sun sank below the horizon. The Bell household, once a place of warmth and laughter, now carried the constant scent of fear. Even the air felt wrong, heavy, charged, as if the unseen had taken residence and made itself at home. John Bell tried to keep order. He was a man of faith and believed that no evil could withstand prayer, but every hymn seemed to provoke the spirit further. At times, as he prayed aloud, the voice would mock him, repeating his words with cruel precision, then twisting them into blasphemies. "Amen," it would whisper from the rafters, followed by laughter that froze the blood in his veins. Betsy Bell's torment grew worse each day. The spirit pulled her hair, pricked her with invisible needles, and left the imprint of fingers on her skin. Some nights her screams carried across the fields, drawing neighbors from miles around who arrived only to find her trembling and bruised, clutching her mother's arms. Lucy Bell, ever steadfast, comforted her daughter with psalms and soft words, though her hands shook with helplessness. No mother could protect her child from something she could not see. The news spread through Adams and into nearby towns. The Bells were well respected. The story was too strange to dismiss. People began to visit, some to pray, others to test their courage. A few arrived with skepticism and left with trembling lips. One farmer, Thomas Gunn, came boasting that he feared no ghost. declaring that he would expose the bell's tale as foolish superstition. That night, as he mocked the spirit aloud, a sudden force struck him across the face, leaving a red welt. He fell to the ground, clutching his cheek. A woman's voice rose in the darkness, laughing.
"Who's the fool now, Thomas?"
it said. The next morning he left without a word, never to return. Word of his experience spread faster than fire through dry grass. The Bell Witch, as the entity was now called, had proven her reach beyond the Bell family. She could strike anyone who doubted her. What set the Bell Witch apart from other hauntings whispered about in early America was her intelligence. This was no simple specter moaning through the night. She conversed with the living. She knew names, secrets, even thoughts. Ministers who came to test her found themselves outmatched. The Reverend James Johnston, who had been one of the first outsiders to witness the haunting, returned with his Bible in hand, prepared to cast out the spirit. As he began to read aloud, the witch interrupted him mid-verse, finishing the passage perfectly, then reciting the same verse backward. "Do you know the word better than I?" The voice taunted. Johnston, shaken, left the house pale and speechless. Later, he told his congregation that the Bell Witch was no ghost, but a force of darkness itself. Something ancient, cunning, and dangerous. The entity seemed to feed on attention. The more people came to hear her, the stronger she became. Some visitors heard only faint knocks, while others experienced full manifestations, invisible blows, hair being pulled, or the sound of lips whispering directly beside their ears. Once, when a group of men gathered in the parlor to question her, she addressed each of them by name, describing details of their lives no one in the Bell family could have known. To one man she recounted a private sin he thought buried years ago. To another, she described the very words he had spoken to his wife that morning before leaving home. Their faces drained of color. The witch laughed, pleased with her performance. "You know me," she said, "as I know you all." The haunting did not confine itself to night. In daylight, objects moved without cause. Tools vanished and reappeared in impossible places. The Bell's food spoiled suddenly, turning sour as though poisoned by unseen hands. Betsy's schoolmates began to fear her, whispering that she carried the witch's curse. One day, as she sat at her school desk, her books flew across the room. A loud slap echoed through the air, and Betsy cried out, her face red from the blow. Her teacher, horrified, gathered the class in prayer, but even that was interrupted by mocking laughter. The room fell silent afterward, each child too afraid to speak. By the time Betsy reached home, word had already spread through town. The witch followed her wherever she went. By spring, the haunting had become a matter of public obsession. Travelers came from as far as Nashville to witness the witch. Some were believers, others skeptics. Even soldiers and government officials heard the tale. It was said that Andrew Jackson, the famed general and future president, visited the Bell farm out of curiosity. As his party approached the property, their horses suddenly froze, the air grew cold, and the wagon refused to move. Jackson, astonished, was said to have exclaimed, "By the Eternal, I'd rather face the British Army than the Bell Witch." Whether this story is true or born of legend, it became part of the myth, one more testament to the witch's fearsome power. As the years passed, the witch's relationship with the Bell family grew more complex. She seemed to despise John Bell, calling him Old Jack, and promising to kill him. Yet she treated Lucy Bell with a strange tenderness. "Sweet lady," she called her, often praising her faith and kindness. Sometimes, when Lucy fell ill, the witch's voice would echo through the house, telling her which herbs to use for healing. The same voice, however, would spend the rest of the night cursing John and tormenting Betsy. It was as if two natures warred within the same spirit, one cruel, one caring, both bound to the family for reasons no one could explain. Fear became their daily companion. They learned to live in fragments of silence, avoiding speech that might provoke the unseen guest. Even the neighbors, once eager for stories, began to keep their distance. Livestock refused to cross the Bell property line. Farmhands quit without notice. When the wind blew across the Red River, it carried faint echoes, laughter, sometimes weeping. Those who heard it would cross themselves and hurry home before nightfall. The Bells were alone in their haunting now, left to face an enemy that could not be touched or reasoned with. The line between faith and madness blurred inside that farmhouse. Each night, as the candles burned low, John Bell sat awake, Bible open on his knees, listening for the sounds that never failed to come. The scratching, the footsteps, the laughter. The witch had become more than a haunting. She was part of their lives, woven into every prayer and every heartbeat. And though John still clung to hope that his faith would see him through, deep down, he began to understand the truth that every haunted soul eventually learns, that some darkness cannot be cast out, because it does not come from beyond, but from within the very world we live in. As 1819 unfolded, the Bell family's ordeal deepened, but it was Betsy Bell who suffered the most, barely 12 years old. She was in the prime of her innocence, bright, kind, and filled with the curiosity of youth. But the Bell witch had marked her as the chosen victim. The torment she endured was unlike anything her family could comprehend. Each morning new bruises appeared on her arms and neck, as if someone had gripped her tightly in the night. Sometimes her hair was found knotted or torn out by the roots, strands scattered across the room. Her screams echoed through the small house until dawn, when exhaustion silenced her. The witch's voice often followed those cries, taunting, laughing, or softly whispering her name, Betsy, Betsy, as though savoring her fear. At first, her parents tried to keep her company every night. Lucy would sit at her bedside, reading scripture by candlelight, while John stood guard at the door. But no prayer seemed to protect her. One night, as Lucy read from the book of Psalms, the spirit's mocking voice rose above her words. "Sing louder, Lucy," it said, "so I can drown the sound of your daughter's tears." The candle flame flickered violently, and Betsy began to convulse, as if seized by invisible hands. John rushed to hold her, but the force threw him back, slamming him against the wall. When the struggles ceased, Betsy lay trembling, her face pale, tears streaking down her cheeks. The witch whispered softly, almost tenderly, "You'll never escape me, child." The haunting grew bolder when Betsy reached her teenage years. She had attracted the affection of a local boy named Joshua Gardner, a kind and respectable young man from the community. Their friendship blossomed into innocent love, and for a time Betsy's spirits lifted. She smiled again, laughed again. The light that had been fading in her seemed to return. But the Bell witch did not approve. "He is not for you," the voice hissed one night as Betsy lay in bed. "If you marry him, you'll suffer." The threats grew constant. Whenever Joshua visited, the witch's presence filled the air, knocks on the walls, furniture rattling, disembodied laughter echoing through the room. Once, as the young couple walked along the Red River, a low voice carried on the wind, "Betsy Bell, I'll tear your heart out." Despite her fear, Betsy continued to see Joshua. Love, it seemed, was the one thing she would not surrender. But the witch's interference only grew more violent. The couple could not find peace. During one of their secret meetings near the riverbank, Betsy suddenly felt a cold hand wrap around her wrist. She screamed, and Joshua saw her being yanked backward, though no one was there. He grabbed her, pulling her close, shouting at whatever unseen thing tormented her. The air turned icy, and a voice, sharp as broken glass, hissed, "Leave her, boy." When he refused, a force struck him across the chest, knocking him to the ground. That night, Joshua confessed to John Bell that he could not protect her. He wept as he spoke, torn between love and terror. John could only place a hand on his shoulder and say, "Son, no one can." By that time, neighbors no longer doubted the Bells' story. They had witnessed too much. They had seen Betsy's bruises appear before their eyes, had heard her cries in the night, and the laughter that followed. Ministers and scholars visited, each with their own theory. A demon, a vengeful ghost, a test from God. None could stop it. The witch, as if amused by their failure, began to speak more openly. She claimed to be the spirit of Kate Batts, a neighbor who had long feuded with John Bell over land and business dealings. "Old Jack cheated me," the voice said one night, "and I'll have my revenge." Whether true or not, the claim spread quickly. The community began to whisper that perhaps John's past had called the curse upon him. Yet others said the spirit only took that name to mislead them, that the voice was ancient, far older than the feud it claimed. The torment of Betsy continued regardless of what name the entity chose. Some nights, the voice would soothe her with lullabies, the same way her mother once had. It spoke of stars and rivers, of a world beyond the veil. Then, without warning, it would change, mocking her, slapping her, screaming obscenities in a tone that rattled the walls. The duality of the witch was maddening, half mother, half monster. Betsy began to lose touch with reality, unsure if she was awake or dreaming. She told her mother she sometimes saw shadows moving at the edge of her vision, not human shapes, but darker things, crawling and twisting as if the air itself had come alive. Lucy held her close, tears in her eyes, but she could offer no comfort. Every prayer felt like whispering into a void that only laughed back. The most chilling episode occurred one evening when Betsy fainted during supper. Her body went limp, her head striking the table before she crumpled to the floor. As Lucy cried out and John lifted her into his arms, a voice filled the room. "She's mine tonight." The family watched helplessly as Betsy's body rose slightly off the ground, trembling in midair. Her hair floated around her face as if underwater. Her eyes rolled back, and a low moan escaped her lips. Then, just as suddenly, she dropped to the floor, gasping for breath. The witch laughed, not with one voice, but many, overlapping and echoing, filling every corner of the house. That night, no one slept. Even the fire refused to burn steadily, its flames shrinking and flaring as though in fear. Weeks passed before Betsy recovered, but the witch's hold never weakened. The community urged the Bells to move away, to leave the cursed land behind, but John refused. "A man cannot flee from the devil," he said. "He can only face him." Yet as time wore on, it became clear that the witch's rage was not random. Her focus remained on John and Betsy, father and daughter, as though their suffering was bound together in some unseen design. Betsy's health declined. She grew pale and thin, her once bright blue eyes hollow with fatigue. Joshua, torn by love and fear, finally ended their engagement under the witch's relentless threats. The night he did, a soft whisper followed him home. "Wise choice, boy." From that day forward, Betsy spoke little of love. For years afterward, she lived in quiet dread. The witch's voice never fully left her. Even when the torment slowed, sometimes she would hear it faintly in the wind or in the creak of her floorboards. It became part of her, an unwanted companion, a scar on her soul. And though the world around her moved on, with new settlers, new farms, and children playing in the fields, Betsy Bell never forgot. Her laughter, when it returned, was softer, touched with the memory of things unseen. The Bell Witch had taken her innocence, her love, and perhaps a part of her faith. What remained was a woman marked by the supernatural, a living reminder that some hauntings do not end when the noise stops. They linger quietly, whispering from the shadows of memory, long after the world believes them gone. By the early 1820s, the Bell Witch was no longer just a local legend whispered among neighbors. She had become a phenomenon that drew curiosity seekers, skeptics, and believers from across Tennessee and beyond. What had started as a family's private nightmare now consumed the entire Red River settlement. The Bell Farm became a destination of dread and fascination. Riders on horseback would approach cautiously, their lanterns swaying in the dark, hoping to catch a glimpse or hear the spirit's voice. Some came with Bibles in hand, determined to banish the evil through prayer. Others came simply to test their courage. But all who entered the Bell home left changed, carrying with them the same haunted look in their eyes, a mixture of awe and fear, for they had seen or heard something that defied reason. The witch seemed to feed on this attention, growing more powerful with every new witness. She thrived in conversation, answering questions before they were asked, exposing secrets no one else could know. Visitors reported hearing her speak in multiple voices, sometimes soft and sweet, other times guttural and harsh, like several entities speaking through the same unseen mouth. One evening, a visiting minister asked, "What are you?" The spirit replied, "I am many things. I was once happy, now I am tormented. I am what men fear and women pray against." Her words sent shivers through everyone in the room. Even the bravest of men could not meet the emptiness that followed her laughter. It was said that when she spoke, the air grew dense, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Despite her cruelty toward John and Betsy, the witch often showed a strange fondness for Lucy Bell. She called her the sweetest soul in Tennessee, and even claimed to protect her. On several occasions when Lucy fell ill, the witch's voice offered remedies, herbs to brew, roots to boil, and Lucy recovered each time. "I'd never harm her," the witch once said, her tone soft and almost human. "She's the only one worth saving." This contradiction, the demon who healed, the ghost who comforted, puzzled everyone. Some began to believe the witch was not entirely evil, but a spirit trapped between worlds, bound by unfinished vengeance. Others thought this compassion was merely a cruel trick to deepen the family's despair. Whatever the truth, the witch's behavior only made her story more compelling and more terrifying. As the months turned to years, the haunting evolved. It extended beyond the Bells' home, following family members into town and even visiting neighbors who doubted her existence. One night, when a group of men gathered in a nearby house to discuss how to rid the community of the witch, a sudden knock rattled the door. Then came the voice, clear, mocking, "You cannot banish me. I was here before your fathers were born." The door swung open on its own, and a gust of cold air swept through the room, extinguishing every candle. The men fled into the night, too frightened to look back. From that point on, even the most skeptical began to keep their distance after sunset. The Bell Witch, it seemed, was not confined by walls or distance. Her dominion extended as far as fear could reach. The community's obsession reached its peak when word spread that General Andrew Jackson, yes, the same Jackson who would later become President of the United States, planned to visit the Bell farm. Jackson had heard tales of the witch through soldiers who claimed to have encountered her during visits to Adams. Intrigued, he set out with a group of men, declaring, "I must see this devil of the Red River for myself." But as his wagon approached the Bells' property, the horses suddenly froze mid-path. The air thickened, the wheels locked as if bound by an unseen force. Jackson reportedly exclaimed, "By the Eternal, I'd rather face the British Army than the Bell Witch." A voice answered from the shadows, "Then you shall." The horses lurched forward again, and the men continued, shaken but determined. That night, they camped near the Bell home. As they told stories by the fire, laughter erupted around them, not from the men, but from the darkness itself. Something unseen rattled their tents, pulled at their saddles, and threw stones from the black woods. One of Jackson's men cried out that he felt a hand strike him, though no one stood near. By morning, Jackson had seen enough. He left the Bell farm and never spoke of the witch again. But the story followed him for the rest of his life, adding another layer of fame, or infamy, to the legend. After Jackson's visit, reports of the witch grew wilder. Travelers claimed to hear her singing on moonlit nights, her voice drifting across the fields. Some said she took the form of animals, a black dog, a smoky cat, even a strange bird that perched on the Bell fence and spoke in human words. Others swore they saw faint lights floating near the Bell home, moving like lanterns in the mist. One farmer's wife claimed that when she tried to follow the lights, she heard footsteps behind her, but saw no one when she turned. The fear became so widespread that many refused to travel the road near the Bell property after dark. Even years later, locals called that stretch of path the Witch's Walk. The witch's power also became more personal. She began appearing in the dreams of those who dared to visit. People described seeing a woman with hollow eyes and tangled hair, her mouth twisted in a grin. Sometimes she stood by their bed whispering, "Do you believe me now?" The line between waking and dreaming blurred. A minister's wife from nearby Springfield confessed that she awoke one night to the sound of her own name, whispered by an unseen voice. When she told her husband, the witch spoke through the walls of their home, mocking them both. Even those who had never met the Bells found themselves haunted, as if the spirit's reach extended through the telling of her story itself. Fear, it seemed, was her chosen vessel, and every retelling gave her life anew. Within the Bell household, daily life became unbearable. Food spoiled before it could be eaten. Tools broke without reason. The livestock grew sick and refused to go near the family barn. John Bell's health began to fail. His limbs stiffened, his vision blurred, and strange fits seized him. During these spells, the witch's voice would gloat, calling him Old Jack, and reminding him of her promise. "I'll see you dead before I leave." Lucy prayed harder than ever, but even she could feel the air shift whenever the voice appeared. Betsy, though older now, still carried the same fear from childhood. The witch continued to taunt her about Joshua Gardner, whispering that her love had doomed them both. The family lived in constant dread, unable to rest, unable to escape. The community, once united in faith, began to fracture. Some believed the Bells had brought the curse upon themselves through sin. Others insisted they were victims of something supernatural that no human could fight. A few began to profit from the story, selling witch charms, hosting gatherings to share their encounters, turning fear into spectacle. What had once been a haunting was now a mirror reflecting human nature, curiosity, greed, faith, and fear intertwined. The Bell Witch had become more than a spirit. She was a presence woven into the fabric of the land itself, a force that thrived as long as her name was spoken. And in the Red River Valley, her name was spoken often. By the close of 1820, the witch's laughter still echoed through the Tennessee hills. Travelers passing the Bell property at night claimed to hear a woman singing softly, the tune ancient and mournful. The farmhouse windows flickered with candlelight long after the family had gone to bed, or so they claimed. Some swore they saw a figure standing at the window, watching, waiting. The witch had become part of the very soil of Adams, rooted deep, eternal. The people of Robertson County had learned a terrible truth. You cannot bury a voice that the land itself remembers. By the winter of 1820, the years of haunting had etched themselves deeply into the body and mind of John Bell. Once a strong and proud man, respected across Robertson County for his integrity and hard work, he now appeared gaunt, trembling, and broken. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, had grown hollow, shadowed by sleepless nights and constant fear. His hands shook when he tried to lift his cup. The once prosperous farmer could scarcely manage his land anymore. Neighbors who visited spoke in hushed tones of his deterioration, of how the man who had once tamed wild acres now struggled to tame the shadows within his own home. The Bell Witch, as if savoring his weakness, seemed to grow bolder with every passing day. Her voice followed him from room to room, mocking, whispering, and cursing him with words that no living soul would dare utter aloud. "Old Jack," she would call him in that sharp, jeering tone that pierced his ears like a blade. "Your end is near. You'll die soon, and I'll be there to watch." Her laughter filled the house, echoing down the halls long after her voice had faded. No matter where John went, the barn, the fields, even the church pew, the witch's voice found him. At times, he would stop mid-step, staring into the distance, as if listening to something only he could hear. The townsfolk began to whisper that he was losing his mind, that perhaps the witch had taken hold of it entirely. Others said he was being punished by God for some secret sin. But those who truly knew him, his wife Lucy, his children, saw something far more chilling. This was not madness born of guilt. It was fear made flesh, consuming him from within. The witch delighted in his suffering. On nights when his strength faltered, she would mimic his own voice, calling to his family in tones that sent shivers down their spines. "Lucy," she would say in a perfect imitation, "come here." But when Lucy approached, she found her husband still in his chair, silent, his eyes wide in terror. Then the laughter came, cruel and distant. "You see, Lucy, even he fears me." At other times, she would mimic Betsy's voice, crying out in false distress, only for the real Betsy to come running from another room, bewildered. The spirit played with them all like a cat with cornered mice, weaving confusion and despair until they no longer trusted the sounds of their own home. John's physical health continued to fail in strange ways. His speech began to slur, and his limbs stiffened. Sometimes he would collapse without warning, gasping as though an invisible hand had seized his throat. The local doctor was summoned repeatedly, but each time he left more baffled than before. No medicine seemed to help. "It is as though his very strength is being drained," one neighbor remarked. Lucy tended to him day and night, her eyes hollow from exhaustion, while the witch's voice tormented her relentlessly. "Is mine, Lucy," the voice hissed from the rafters. "You can pray all you like. Your God won't hear you." By late autumn, John Bell could no longer leave his bed. His once deep voice had become a weak whisper, and his body trembled constantly. The family took turns sitting by his side, though each visit was accompanied by the witch's cruel amusement. When the children prayed for their father's recovery, the spirit would interrupt, repeating their words in mockery. "Bless Father Bell," she'd sneer. "May his soul rest soon." Sometimes she would hum softly, like a lullaby, until everyone in the room felt their skin crawl. Even the neighbors who once visited daily began to stay away. They said the house felt wrong. The very air seemed to vibrate with unseen malice. One old friend of John's, after visiting, declared, "Whatever that thing is, it isn't from this earth." He never returned. As the year drew to its close, the haunting reached its most terrifying stage. The witch became almost constant, her voice drifting through the house day and night. Sleep was impossible. The Bells could not tell whether the knocking at night came from the witch or their own minds breaking under the strain. On several occasions, John's youngest children claimed to see shadows moving across the walls even when no fire burned. "She's watching him," Betsy said once, staring toward the ceiling where faint whispers seemed to echo. The witch herself confirmed it. "I will end him," she said one night, her voice filled with venom. "He's lived too long already." On the morning of December 19, 1820, Lucy found John Bell unresponsive. His breathing was shallow, his eyes rolled back. A strange vial of dark liquid sat on the bedside table. None of the family recognized it. The doctor was called, and when he examined the contents, his face went pale. "This is no medicine I've ever prescribed," he said. The witch's voice rose immediately, triumphant and loud.
"It's mine."
"I gave old Jack a dose last night. Fixed him good." The family froze in horror as the laughter filled the room, echoing through the walls until the windows seemed to tremble. Lucy tried to pray, but the words faltered on her lips. By afternoon, John Bell was dead. His body lay still, his face twisted in a strange expression, not fear, but almost a kind of grim peace, as though death had finally granted him release. The funeral drew the entire community. Men and women wept openly. Even those who had once doubted the haunting came to pay their respects. But the witch would not allow them peace, not even in mourning. As the pastor spoke over John's coffin, her voice rang out loud and clear. "He's gone!" "Old Jack Bell is dead." Then came a peal of laughter, shrill and human, that rolled across the fields like thunder. The mourners stood frozen, their grief turning to terror. Some fled, others fell to their knees in prayer. The voice continued for nearly an hour, laughing, mocking, until the last shovel of dirt fell on the grave. Then, just as suddenly, silence. The air grew still. The witch was gone, or so they thought. For weeks after John's death, the Bell house was eerily quiet. The family dared to believe the nightmare had ended. Lucy tended to her home. Betsy tried to smile again, and the younger children slept through the night for the first time in years. But the peace was fragile. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind made them flinch. Then, one night, as Lucy prepared for bed, a soft voice whispered from the darkness, "I'll return, Lucy." In 7 years. The sound was calm, almost gentle, but it froze her blood. The witch's promise lingered in the air like a curse that could not die. And deep down, Lucy knew the Bell witch was not finished. She had taken John Bell, but her story was far from over. After John Bell's death, the air around the Bell farm grew still for the first time in years. The endless footsteps, the knocking on walls, the cruel laughter. All of it stopped. For the first time in memory, silence filled the rooms where chaos had ruled. The family was exhausted beyond grief, hollowed by years of torment, but there was relief buried beneath their sorrow. It seemed as if the witch had finally achieved her dark purpose and moved on. The neighbors, too, whispered that the curse had lifted. People began to visit again, cautiously at first, bringing food and condolences. The children played outside. Lucy sat by the window without fear. Even Betsy began to smile again, though the shadow in her eyes never fully faded. The winter of 1820 passed into spring, and life slowly began to take root once more. The Bell farm, once overgrown and untended, was restored by the remaining sons. The fields bloomed again, and for a time, the Bells dared to believe that peace had returned for good. But in quiet moments, Lucy would still hear faint echoes. A creak on the stairs when no one was there, or the faint hum of a woman's voice carried on the wind. It wasn't enough to frighten her, not yet. She told herself it was her imagination, a remnant of trauma. But deep inside, she remembered the witch's last words, "I'll return, Lucy." In 7 years, years passed, and the memory of the Bell Witch began to fade into legend. The story was told in hushed tones around firesides, a cautionary tale for children and skeptics alike. Some said the haunting had been punishment for greed or pride, others believed it was the devil's work. Ministers debated it from pulpits. Newspapers from Nashville to Kentucky printed exaggerated versions of the events, each retelling adding new horrors. That the witch had flown through the night sky, that she had spoken prophecies, that she had cursed the land forever. And yet, amid all the speculation, the Bell family lived quietly, hoping never to hear that voice again. But legends have a way of keeping their promises. In 1828, exactly 7 years after John Bell's death, the witch returned. It began subtly, almost gently, as though testing the boundaries between her world and theirs. One night, Lucy was sitting by the fire with her son Richard, when a cold gust swept through the room, extinguishing the flame. A soft voice followed, low and familiar, "Lucy." The old woman froze, her heart pounding. Richard looked around, puzzled, but he heard it too. "Lucy," the voice said again. "Did you miss me?" The words echoed through the house, and before they could respond, the laughter came, faint, almost playful, but unmistakable. The Bell Witch had kept her word. This time, her presence was different. There were no violent assaults, no physical torment, only the constant awareness of being watched. Objects moved occasionally, a chair scraping the floor, a candle flickering out, but the witch's voice carried a new tone. She no longer mocked or cursed. Instead, she spoke of distant lands, of times before the Bells had lived, of strange events yet to come. Lucy, though terrified, listened. The witch spoke of the future, of inventions, of war, of men who would rise to power. "A great fire will consume your cities," she said one night, "and a great war will tear your country apart." Her words, though cryptic, seemed to carry weight. Years later, after the Civil War ravaged Tennessee, some swore that the witch had foretold it all. Neighbors learned of the witch's return through whispers and fear. Some came to the house to listen, hoping to hear her speak. She would often engage them in conversation, answering questions no living soul could know. When one man asked where she came from, she replied, "From the void between breath and shadow, from where your prayers go unanswered." Another asked why she haunted the Bells, and she said, "Because their blood remembers." Her words made little sense, yet they left a chill that lingered long after she vanished. Unlike before, she did not stay constantly. She came and went as she pleased, sometimes vanishing for weeks before returning without warning. Her presence was like the shifting wind, unpredictable, unseen, but undeniable. Despite the relative calm, the return of the witch weighed heavily on Lucy and her family. Every whisper in the night brought dread. Every unexplained noise reignited old fears. But as the months passed, her visits grew shorter, her voice fainter. Then, one night, as Lucy prayed by her bedside, the witch spoke one last time, "I will go now, but I will return again in 100 years." The room fell silent. The air grew still, and the voice faded. Not with laughter this time, but with something that almost sounded like sorrow. Lucy never heard her again. True to her word, the witch's story did not end there. Nearly a century later, in the early 1900s, strange occurrences began once more near the old Bell property. Locals reported hearing voices in the woods, laughter, whispering, faint singing at night. Farmers said their plows struck soft ground that shouldn't have been there, as if something had been buried and moved. A few who ventured near the old Bell Witch Cave, a narrow, dark cavern on the property, claimed to see faint lights flickering inside, or to hear a woman's voice murmuring from within the earth. Those who dared enter often returned pale and shaken, speaking little of what they saw. By then, the world had changed. Railroads ran through Tennessee, and electricity lit the homes of Adams. But the legend of the Bell Witch endured. People traveled from miles away to see the cave, to stand on the ground where the haunting had begun. Some brought tape recorders, others cameras, hoping to capture proof of the supernatural. Many claimed to hear faint knocks or soft laughter in their recordings afterward. Some said they felt invisible hands tugging at their clothes or brushing against their hair. The witch had become something more than a spirit. She had become a part of the land, an echo that refused to fade with time. Even today, those who visit the Bell Witch Cave say the air feels heavy, charged with something unseen. Locals warn not to mock the story, not to call out her name aloud. They say she listens still, waiting for someone foolish enough to invite her back. And though no one has heard her full voice in generations, there are moments, quiet, windless nights along the Red River, when people claim to hear faint singing from deep within the hills. A woman's voice, melodic and mournful, carrying through the dark. Whether she ever truly left, no one knows. But the land remembers her, just as the bells did. And perhaps that is the true horror of the Bell Witch, not that she tormented a family, but that she endured. She transcended death, distance, and disbelief. She became a living myth, one that breathes whenever her story is told. The Bell Witch may have fallen silent, but she is never gone. As long as her name is spoken, her laughter lingers just beyond hearing, somewhere between the trees and the wind, waiting to answer again. Time has a way of distorting truth. As decades turned into centuries, the story of the Bell Witch became less a single haunting and more a living reflection of fear itself, reshaped, retold, and reimagined by every generation that spoke her name. What began as the torment of one Tennessee family in the early 1800s grew into a ghost story that refused to die, evolving with every retelling, every candlelit whisper. People who had never set foot in Adams spoke as though they had walked the Bell property themselves. Newspapers printed sensational accounts. Traveling preachers warned of sin and unseen forces. And as modern life crept in, with electricity, cars, and radio, the witch adapted, her legend bending but never breaking. By the turn of the 20th century, the Bell Witch had transformed from a private nightmare into a public fascination. In 1894, Martin Ingram, a local newspaper editor, published an authenticated history of the Bell Witch, claiming it was based on the journal of Richard Williams Bell, John's son. The book detailed every incident, every sound, every conversation between the family and the entity that plagued them. Some called it proof, others dismissed it as folklore, yet the story spread like wildfire, crossing state lines and seeping into American consciousness. Churches debated it as a spiritual battle. Skeptics analyzed it as mass hysteria. But deep in the heart of Adams, where the Red River still winds quietly through the hills, locals swore the truth was darker than any book could capture. It wasn't long before strange reports began again, flickering lights in the woods, ghostly figures seen walking near the old Bell Cemetery, whispers echoing from the mouth of the cave. Visitors who ventured into the Bell Witch Cave often returned changed, not harmed, but unsettled. They spoke of hearing faint tapping on the cave walls, or feeling sudden drops in temperature though the air outside was still. One man claimed that as he stepped deeper inside, his lantern went out, and in the pitch darkness, a voice whispered near his ear, "You shouldn't have come." When the light returned, the path behind him was gone. The earth had shifted, as if the cave itself were alive. The town of Adams, Though small, became known far beyond its borders. Tourists arrived in wagons and later cars, bringing cameras and tape recorders, eager to capture a glimpse of the witch. Local families turned the legend into a livelihood, offering tours and storytelling sessions by firelight. But among them, some still believed she lingered, watching. They warned outsiders not to mock her name, not to call out to her in jest. The Bell Witch doesn't forgive laughter. One old farmer told a reporter in the 1930s, "She listens, and when she laughs back, it's never friendly." As the years passed, the legend began to warp. In some tellings, the witch became a demon sent by Satan himself to punish the Bells. In others, she was the restless spirit of a murdered woman or a native guardian angered by the theft of sacred land. Each version reflected the fears of its time, of war, of loss, of injustice, of the unknown. During the Great Depression, people whispered that the witch cursed those who took too much when others starved. During World War II, soldiers stationed nearby claimed to hear women singing in the night woods before their deployment, an omen that few of them would return. The witch became a mirror, a shape that changed with the hearts of those who believed in her. By the mid-20th century, her presence had entered popular culture. Radio hosts told her story on Halloween nights, and children dared each other to say her name in the dark. Movies and plays depicted her as a vengeful spirit, a wronged woman, or a cursed witch seeking justice. Each version twisted the truth further, until the original story of a frontier family tormented by something beyond reason became half lost beneath layers of fiction. Yet the people of Adams never forgot. Even today, descendants of the Bells live nearby, quietly avoiding discussions about their past. Some refuse interviews. Others speak reluctantly, insisting that the haunting was real but misunderstood. It wasn't evil. One descendant once said, "It was ancient, older than any of us." A science, too, has tried to explain the Bell Witch. Psychologists call it a case of mass hysteria, fueled by isolation and fear. Historians suggest it was local folklore magnified by religion and superstition. Paranormal researchers point to the cave's magnetic field, claiming it distorts sound and light, but none of these explanations account for everything. Not the voices dozens heard, nor the physical injuries witnessed by neighbors, nor the accuracy of the witch's supposed predictions. The line between myth and reality remains blurred, like a reflection in dark water, recognizable but never quite tangible, and yet something endures in the soil of Adams. The Bell Witch Cave still stands, its entrance half hidden by brush and moss, the air around it damp and still. Those who visit describe a heaviness, an unshakable sense of being watched. Some leave offerings, coins, crosses, candles, out of respect or fear. Others come with bravado, mocking the legend, only to return pale and silent. A few never return at all, their cars found abandoned near the trail. Locals shrug when asked. She chooses who to show herself to, they say, and when she does, it's not for fun. The most unsettling part of the Bell Witch story is how it refuses to die. Unlike most hauntings that fade with time, hers only grows stronger in retelling. She doesn't live in one house or one cave anymore. She lives in the story itself, in every voice that repeats her name, in every listener who shivers when the wind moves through the trees. The witch no longer needs to appear. The fear she sowed centuries ago sustains her, passed from generation to generation like a curse whispered in secret. Every time the tale is told, she breathes again. Some say the Bell Witch will return in her full form one day, not as a whisper or a shadow, but as she once was, with laughter that cracks the air and footsteps that shake the earth. If that prophecy holds true, her time may be near. And if she does return, she will not come for vengeance or to torment one family. She will come to remind us that some stories are not stories at all. They are warnings. The past never truly dies, it only waits to be remembered. So when the night is quiet and the wind passes through the trees near Adams, listen closely. You might hear a faint voice, distant but clear, carried on the breeze from the Red River Valley, laughing softly, as if amused that her story is still being told. And in that moment, you'll understand what the Bell Witch really wanted all along, not fear, not blood, but remembrance. to be spoken of, to never be forgotten. Because in the end, that's how legends live forever, not in death, but in the telling.